welcome to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. It's Tuesday, February 7th, and we're here this afternoon with Representative Peter Anthony, who is going to do an introduction of H54 for us. So welcome, Representative Anthony, a veteran of the old Gov.Ops Committee.
It's old home day. Yes, thank you very much, Chair McCarthy. H54 is a short form bill. It is my way of starting a conversation about the relationship that I think should be by now more formal between towns and state responsibilities, initiatives, etc. I come out of a municipal, if you like, city of Barrie. And as the chief executive, I found myself negotiating with various state agencies over the years where we could help or we were resistant to help. But there was no formal process. It was all ad hoc. The other, if you like, forced marriage is whenever there's a declaration of emergency. As all of you know, I think you were around during Irene. In those circumstances, there is a regime, but it's really something you don't want to relive frequently. It's top down. Inconsiderate in some ways that what needs to get done gets done. That's not building a relationship. What I have in mind is to try and build a relationship. I'll give you an example. The city of Barrie, quite a while ago, decided that because we have such a large stock of rental properties and the state fire marshal cannot get around to do inspections on a regular basis. They're just too thinly peopled. They have, if you like, higher priority responsibilities. And we in the city of Barrie decided we'll take that on. However, there's no formal agreement or arrangement by which we were either incentivized, and I mean that financially as well as spiritually, if you will. There was no formal arrangement. We, of course, had to promise and sign a memorandum of understanding with the fire marshal's office that we would go down the checkoff that state statute essentially empowers them to go down. We added a few things, lifted some responsibilities from the Department of Health, because as you probably know, the Department of Health has to look out for mold and insects and failure to provide heat, et cetera, et cetera. So we have our own regime. We do it on our local taxpayers' dime. We like to think it works well. We have a familiarity with the turf that I think the state fire marshal, who may visit once in 5 years, doesn't have. So that experience from my money and my experience sitting in your shoes here, having to review charters, which are requests for authority to do this, that, and the other. Why can't we have a regime that doesn't require communities to come in and go through a charter process to get authority, which, as you probably know, is a 2-year deal, and set up some sort of process between agencies, the executive branch, and members of the League of Cities and Towns, for want of a better, if you like, summary, and say, okay, can't we devolve some authority that wants to get done by the state of Vermont, that the towns are perfectly equipped to do, and they would do it, if you will, if for no other reason, for the benefit of their citizens, but also for the taxpayers. If in fact, we're essentially doing something that otherwise state employees would have to pay for. And in my proposal, I say, I don't want to namby-pamby around the financial aspect of this. We should figure out what is it that the states are avoiding in terms of cost and build that into the relationship, whether it's by compact, memorandum of understanding, or some other legal device. Who should be at the table? I leave to you. I threw out the League because, frankly, they're the ones always looking for more authority for the towns. Okay, well, so come to the table. But when it's all said and done, I think it will establish a degree of what the political scientists call comity. That is to say, a comfortability with working together instead of the kind of tension which I sensed when I was in your shoes between what towns would like to do but what the legislative branch or the executive branch is not permitting them to do. That's the tension that I wish we could get around. So this is the point of my proposal, H54, is to start that conversation. And I'm happy to come back in and talk about ideas of what kind of group to put together if you folks want to go forward with that bill. Obviously, I have cued in Karen Horn to watch and see what's happening today. I've talked with her about this in the past. It's not new in hers and my conversation, even back when I was a municipal official. So with that, let me pause and see if you have questions that I can help with.
Questions for Representative Anthony? So the short form bill, you've put a lot on the table. Everything, public safety, inspections, code enforcement. And I know we have kind of a variety of different ways that we've split the work of providing certain services across the state. We've already started to talk about that in the context. I was wondering if perhaps regional dispatch is one that you might have been thinking about in this.
I was present during the warning that the VSP is taking a walk and you folks better figure out what you're going to do. And yes, I don't mean this list to be exclusatory or exclusive. There are all kinds of things. As you probably know, there is a mechanism for regional, what are they called, compacts amongst towns. But again, the initiative comes from town to town. It doesn't directly involve any of the state responsibilities or state authorities. My proposal is to bridge that gap. And dispatches is obviously one where the state has provided that for many years, including E911. But of course, it's slowly, if you will, devolving. And where it will go, who knows? But it's an ideal candidate to start that conversation.
I believe we'll be seeing a bill from our colleagues in the Senate on regional dispatch. They've been diving into it first, but I think at least on that particular issue, we've definitely got the wolf is still at the door that you discussed about the potential for. We're already seeing some staffing issues lead to decline in level of service and coverage. There are probably a bunch of different topics, areas that delving in here would work. And the proposal, just so I understand, Representative Anthony, is that there'd be kind of one mechanism to sort of do the compensation or the assigning of these responsibilities across all these different service areas.
I think it's sort of an office of liaison between the state and its interests and particular regions or towns in general.
Great. Well, thank you for bringing this to us. Anybody questions? Representative Nugent.
Do you see this allowing more collaboration between cities and towns so that they could form their own connections? Is that kind of?
They can, but notice, unless there's some incentive money on the table from the state, I would think. I mean, the state is far superior at raising funds than any town or city. For obvious reasons, you've seen charters who try to expand that authority. So you know that it's frustrating as to where the money comes from. So to the extent to which there would be some incentive by the state for a region and a city and a town to essentially take on a responsibility that otherwise will fall to the state, go for it.
Thank you.
Representative Anthony, I see you've steered away from the education end of things.
I'm on the muni side.
It's probably for good reason, but I'm sure there could probably be another bill come at us for that too. And I've certainly heard at legislative breakfasts and so on that, principals and school boards and all that are really frustrated with not having any of the funds to do some of their improvements on their buildings and so on. They used to be able to rely on the state for a percentage of that, but anyway, interesting.
Okay, I appreciate it. Again, I was staying away from that side of, frankly, I'm more familiar with the municipal side. I mean, I don't want to talk where I don't really have personal experience.
Yep.
Any other questions for Representative Anthony? Thank you for being part of our 5 minutes of fame, 10 minutes of fame.
I love it.
We're trying to hear from as many bill sponsors as possible, so I appreciate you.
Great. No, thank you very much. And yeah, invite me back anytime.
Did you get a cookie before you go?
No, okay, I'm full of cookies.
So are we.
So our next introducer of a bill will be Representative Connor Casey. So please welcome to House Gov.Ops and Military Affairs, Representative Casey.
You get on institutions, you build all the state buildings. I think we'd have a bigger committee room. This is lovely. Go to the chiropractor every week.
There are some trade-offs. We do have to walk up and down stairs a little bit more than the average.
Fair play, fair play.
But yeah, you're here today to talk with us about H-52. So please tell us what it's all about.
All right, and it's a one sentence bill pretty much there. So hopefully I can be pretty brief. But it's good to be back in Gov.Ops. I spent a lot of time here in my 20s and 30s. I was political director of VSCA for about 8 years there. So I have a lot of familiarity with, some of the issues that go into this bill. Just to be brief, again, it's a one sentence bill. What it's hoping to accomplish is we have about 800 temporary employees in state government at the moment right now. You probably hear about this from Human Resources. I can tell you in the time, and maybe things have changed, but I don't think so, talking to my constituents. A lot of these temps are used and abused in state government. They just really are. Some of them spend years working as temps, doing the work of full-time permanent employees, and receive no benefits, no representation during that time. So the purpose of this bill is, and I really thought of it just, upstairs we're hearing about a lot of the understaffing issues in corrections. We're at a crisis point right now. We can barely keep these facilities open. And I think the labor shortage isn't unique just to this department. It's all over state government. So as we're looking for, okay, how do you change something from like a job to a career? You need that carrot in some cases. And, I think it's sort of a historical injustice that we've had people, working for years and years as temporary employees. And then when they become permanent full-time employees, none of the years they spent serving the people of the state count towards the retirement system, right? If you work like 3 years as a temp, that's how many more years you're going to have to work to be eligible. So I just hope we could rectify this. And, I just think about some of the CEOs I talk to anyways, okay, you're making $20 an hour in a correctional facility, right? You have a chance of getting assaulted. You have bodily fluids thrown at you. We've been hearing testimony about this stuff. Why would I want to continue my career in corrections when I could make $5 an hour more working at the Burlington Bagel factory just down the street there? So you need these incentives. And I think by giving this credit, it would make a very real and immediate difference in people's lives in terms of their future in state government here. So again, it's the right thing to do. And I'm sure Human Resources could provide stats about how many people had previous time as temp employees, what this would cost the system. I don't have that data for you right now. But I think it's an issue worth pursuing. And, it's about treating people right. It really is. I represent Montpelier. Pound for pound, I probably have more state employees than anybody in my district here. So I hear from these temps, and I tell you, it's not glamorous work. So we'd love to do right by them.
Questions, Representative?
Yeah, just you had mentioned HR and their look at it. What's your consideration for, let's say, a temp that's worked 5 years and goes into it and gets those 5 years credited, but hasn't paid anything into the retirement plan? How would that work?
Yeah, I think that you could have that discussion. I'm sure that would be something that HR would throw on the table. You got to buy it back, right? So I'm sort of starting with the premise there. I don't know. I guess I'm sort of agnostic on this at the moment, but yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Morgan.
It's just a generic question. I mean, somebody may in the room know the answer. I'm just curious, we count as temporary state employees?
I was going to hand out union cards for the committee here. So the organizer's a rep, right? No, I don't think, based on the definition of the statute, you would not.
More of a curiosity.
Interesting. So your bill, though, just has the credit for the time worked being added. So once a person, say employee moves into the system, then they get credit for their time.
Exactly.
It doesn't talk about buying back.
It doesn't go into that, no.
And for the uninitiated who haven't been with us to talk about credits for years of service and the way the pension system work, we will be, I think, taking more testimony along the way about pensions and how the system works. We've gotten just little bit of introduction this biennium, but some of us who are veterans of the committee have delved into these issues significantly. I'd be interested, do you have a sense of how many people have more than a year of service as a temp? I mean, are we talking about like a dozen people?
No, you're talking more than that.
Yeah, Representative Rowicki.
Thank you for bringing this up. And this committee has looked into this in the past, and we've heard from HR. Now, there are some temps where it makes sense. The tax department takes some people on in March, April, and May. Many of those retirees. The state parks hire some people for the system. But I also know that there were people, when I worked in family services, caseworkers, 20 hours a week, just enough so they don't get benefits for 4 or 5 years. And I think this is something we need to look into, and it would help. You know, there's how many openings in state government right now. And I wonder if something like this would help us address the shortages there. Certainly a worker's market right now. I think there's 2 jobs for every person looking for a job right now.
And I think you're right. I don't mean to say there are not any appropriate uses of temp employees in government. Of course there are. But if you look at the 800, I would bet the majority are, not appropriate there. And why do we do it? It's cheaper. It's cheaper not to pay benefits, right?
Representative Hooper.
The number that you threw out, you probably would find on one shift at one correctional facility on one day. That's how bad that is.
Throughout the state.
Well, thank you for bringing this proposal to us, Representative Casey.
Good to be back. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Right. And Representative Nichols here, and I'll invite you to take the hot seat.
I haven't done this yet this session.
Oh, great.
Nice to be in a new committee.
Well, welcome to House Gov.Ops and Military Affairs. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about H49.
Nice to see you all, meet some of you. Logan Nicole, representative from Ludlow. Also representing Mount Holly and Shrewsbury. My bill is, you should have it on your committee page. It's a short form. The basic premise was, it was brought to me by some local members of my fire department. The idea is to try to create some incentives to help them recruit more volunteers and paid call staff, as it were. And so this is a system. The general idea is something that they do in New York State that they implemented years ago. They call them LOSAPs. So I also emailed the committee assistant just the PowerPoint that they had used to present this idea to me. That's also on your committee page. I thought it was a really interesting model. I didn't know exactly how to structure it, and I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to proceed. That's why I drafted it as a short form for now. They also kind of presented it to me pretty late in the summer, so I didn't have time to actually draft a full bill, but I did not mean to say that I wasn't behind the issue by drafting a short form. Sometimes that is what that kind of implies. I really do stand behind this idea. I think it's a good idea. I just didn't really have the time to draft a full bill before session. And I thought this was a nice idea just to get out there and present. The idea is that you create these length of service award programs for volunteers and paid call fired, quasi volunteers, where the longer that you're in that you're volunteering, like with the fire department, that you end up building some equity towards a pension, type of pension. It's a very low amount. In New York State, they have it in their statute, but it's not a actually state-funded system. It is in statute to serve as a model for towns that towns can adopt if they so choose, which is something, that I think we would have to do in Vermont as well, just being a Dillon's rule state. You kind of have to put it out there, the ability for towns to do things like that. And so I thought it was a neat idea to explore more. One of the members of my local volunteer paid call fire department had just put it to us as he had worked in a fire department in Long Island for a long time and before moving to Vermont, and he was getting a very, very small pension from that work, but he had worked for that fire department for decades, and then he's collecting like $50 a month. And so he thought, it's not like a substantial amount of money, it's not a substantial investment for the municipality, but it does create just that incentive that to stay there or to go work for the fire department. Obviously, it's a big issue for our fire department and for fire departments all over the state, that we just don't have volunteers. We don't have people volunteering. People don't have time. And so to try to create some sort of incentive to keep people for longer and to volunteer in general was the general idea.
In your research, did you see New York or any of the other states that have this kind of program where it applies beyond just the fire, where like maybe EMS volunteers, other volunteer public safety?
Yeah, I think that's how it's structured in New York. And again, it's in statute, and so it allows towns to adopt the model. So I think the town would have to choose whether, what volunteer staff it applies to and what staff it doesn't. But I think it's structured so that it can apply to EMS and like services.
Questions for Representative Cole? Representative Hooper?
So when we bumped into each other in the hallway and talked a little bit about this, if we're talking about exclusively volunteers, so there's no compensation.
So I'm in my bill, that was an error of omission on my part. I meant to have it say volunteer and paid call. Paid call is another population that I think I imagined this being for.
So in the volunteer section, where there's no money, it's labor and a nice hat. Where does the money come from to create the benefit?
It comes from the town.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something that the town would, create an investment for years of service.
Okay.
Questions for Representative Cole? Representative Rowicki?
Now, did you say you were part of your local?
I'm not, no.
Okay, I know in our town, we're down probably half what we should have in the fire department. There was a fire not that long ago where we have a ladder truck, but they didn't have enough people to send the ladder truck out. And I think this is pretty much a challenge around the state. Is everybody hearing or seeing this? So it's.
Yeah, it's a major issue for us. I know it's, different requirements in staffing, especially with an ambulance, when you have to have a certain qualification level of person to staff the ambulance. And then you can only have a volunteer do certain tasks. I know that's been a big issue for us, and just making sure that you have the right person to actually run a truck.
Anything that we can do to help, I think.
Yeah.
Should.
Thank you much. I do have people, the PowerPoint that I sent you all, I had permission from the group that created that, and they are willing to testify or, elaborate on the details if you decide to take it off the wall.
We are going to be spending some significant time, probably just before and then after crossover, really digging into a bunch of our public safety jurisdiction and some of the challenges that around staffing and looking at the models. I know we'll be seeing a bill on regional dispatch, for instance. So these overlapping public safety issues that are facing a lot of our communities right now are going to be this might be an interesting thing to look at. I definitely am very protective over the sustainability and health of the retirement systems after the work that we did on Gov.Ops in the last biennium. So I want to be very, very careful about any kind of changes or expansion of that we might think about making. But I also, a thing that your bill brings to mind is that some conversations we've had with the new treasurer about potential changes and ways to make the Green Mountain retirement system opportunity more attractive are things that I think we might be hearing about too. So this is good food for thought.
Nice.
Yeah, no, just, and maybe Representative Nowicki can help me out too, but it might have been a number of years ago, but I thought Beth Pierce, the treasurer at the time, was considering a form of statewide retirement that anybody could basically sign on to, and maybe, do you remember Representative Hooper?
I'm not sure that that's public sector.
Okay.
I think that
You know,
when we were, it's still on the burner, but the feds have been doing stuff that have not necessarily made it easy to go forward. But when we looked at the structure, we were pretty much looking at employers as opposed to.
But couldn't the municipalities be considered an employer? I mean, just an idea that if something that broad was out there, maybe groups like this could.
Yeah, and I wonder how it's structured. I know for our EMS, our ambulance services functions as an enterprise fund. So I don't know, it wouldn't be public sector. It's kind of quasi.
I just don't remember at the meetings ever talking about the public sector opportunities and that.
The important distinction here would just be that, it's creating an award or like a pension type of system for people that are not paid at all.
I see.
For the volunteers, they are not compensated in any way. For the paid call, they're compensated very little just for when they show up. But you're not deducting anything from that paycheck to use towards a pension. It's just creating a system where after people have been volunteers for a certain number of years, they're presumed to have an interest that then the town pays out as a reward.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for introducing this idea to us, Representative Hooper.
But the structure you're talking about is probably a defined contribution, traditional retirement.
Yeah, I don't know where I would put it. I mean, it's not actually a defined contribution because they're not, I suppose the town is contributing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess defined contribution.
You had shared a couple of additional supporting slide decks that are in that talk about both models.
Yeah.
So I think, if anybody's interested in digging in a little bit, I'm just was reading through in preparation here and seeing, there's a bunch of different ways that communities do this.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm inviting Representative Nickel to stick around for our next topic as a liaison from House Commerce and Economic Development, because I think there's some overlapping jurisdiction. So we're if you want to take a seat, and we'll kind of switch gears, and if it makes sense to have you up again, I really appreciate you hanging out and doing both of these things, trying to be efficient with your time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So I'm going to have Representative Byrong, I think, just kind of tee up what we're hearing testimony on today, and then we're going to invite Mr. Welch to speak. An issue has come up that I think is going to affect a number of Vermont businesses around insurance. And so it's a little overlapping jurisdiction, but I think today we just want to elevate the issue. And Representative Byron, do you want to talk a little bit about how this came to our attention?
Yeah, happily. So what we're going to discuss today, the agenda states, is an issue of third-class liquor liability. Third class, to remind everyone, is specific to spirits, high ABV alcohol. And what is going on right now is last Friday, an email went out to some of the senators and reps in the Burlington area. Senator Ron Hinsdale called me because this is something we've been talking about with the industry. So liability insurance for, I guess, what are perceived higher risk or higher risk exposure establishments, operators that serve after midnight with high alcohol to food receipts. So very like clubby music venues, those styles of businesses. There's a bar sale going on, or was going on, in Burlington, and the inability to acquire this insurance by the prospective buyers, new owners, is making the deal fall through. Now, I'm switching hats to a independent restaurant organization that my business is engaged with. Some of the members, including Higher Ground and Pickle Barrel down in Killington, were running into this problem a few years ago, it started about a few years ago, where rates were going up very noticeably. They were starting to find a harder time finding carriers for their insurance, and the owners of Higher Ground became involved with a couple of venues in Maine and noticed that they were actually paying significantly lower insurance rates in Maine than they were here for very comparable business structure. So it wasn't a foreign concept. Here as it hurt. Once we started discussing this issue that was raised with the parties being deemed essentially uninsurable, last Friday, we started making some calls and sniffing around, and this is apparently a bigger problem than was known with this new cycle of people applying for insurance with the new year. So it turns out that several operators are now actually falling into the bucket of uninsurable, which is a major problem for a business that serves alcohol. Many landlords actually require that they fall under the insurance liability because of something that you're going to start hearing about if you haven't heard already, which is dram shop law, which is a liability exposure law and provision that we have in statute. So that's really like the core of this, is trying to figure out why this is becoming such an issue in Vermont. Other states that have dram shop laws are not experiencing this. And this is where our guest, Richard Welch, comes into play. I had asked that the DLL and DFR to try and find somebody who works in the insurance industry to explain sort of how we got here and what are avenues we could take to make this more functional for these hospitality operators. Now, Representative Nicole is here because this may fall into more of an insurance DFR bucket and not so much what our charge is with the DLL. But we were going to start this conversation here just because of my background in working on this to this point. I think I'll stop there and ask if anybody has any questions. Representative.
Mr. Vice Chair, how many states, if you know, have dram shop?
I believe the number is about 35-ish, 30 to 35, but they vary on how they approach it. Yeah. Without getting too wonky. It's not all.
We're the only state that has this problem
that I'm aware of. Really?
Imagine Dr. Welch would know.
Yes, that's a better question for him, but we definitely rate as one of the higher risk, apparently. I was discussing one of the operators that was having a hard time getting insurance, the gentleman down in Rutland, and he actually has gotten to the point where he's trying to get a functional quote out of a high liability, high risk insurance carrier out of Vegas. Sure. That's how far downstream he's gone. So these are the questions I want to pose to him.
So thank you, Mr. Welch, for being with us today. I think I'm going to hold committee questions until after we hear some testimony, if that's okay.
You might answer what I had, that's fine.
Do you want to lay out your question, Representative Morgan?
I was going to say, was it, and unless I missed it, have we had a greater incidence of incidences out there that have caused than any other state?
I have a question for myself to ask him. Where are we at with issues per capita as far as incidents and complaints? Yeah, I was going to ask that very
Okay, perfect.
Mr. Wells, thank you for bearing with us through the preamble. I appreciate you being with the House Gov.Ops and Military Affairs Committee today. Would you just introduce yourself and
absolutely.
Organization for the record?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Richard Welch. I'm the president and CEO of Hospitality Insurance Group. Hospitality Insurance Group is a small Massachusetts-based mutual company. We actually specialize in liquor liability insurance. That's our number one line of business. Our business consists of liquor liability, as I said, but also general liability, commercial property. We write a business owner's policy as well, which provides, comprehensive insurance. And we write an excess liability policy. We're active in 7 states, including Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Vermont. I don't know if you have any other questions about me before I move on.
No, I think we're good.
Okay. The first thing I wanted to do in terms of, I think a lot of this actually speaks to, the points that you were looking to get answers on. So I think this will probably be helpful to you, but some backdrop of what's happening in this line of business in general. Right now, if you look back over the last few years across the country, the liquor liability line of business has not performed well. In addition, right now at this moment, there is, what I would describe as somewhat of a crisis going on in the reinsurance market, which is the markets where, we all buy our insurance to protect us from, wild swings in losses. Those rates have gone up a great deal over the past cycle. That's reflecting some sort of very complicated and technical things going on in the reinsurance market, having to do with cost of capital and all that kind of thing. But it also has to do with the fact that the cost of the underlying business that they're insuring, our business, has gone up in the last several years. As a result of that, the market for liquor liability insurance across the whole country has become very hard, in the sense that, rates are going up a lot to try and, recover these costs. And we're seeing a number of companies making strategic decisions to, withdraw from the line of business altogether, to cut back on the line of business in a strategic way, to, reduce states where they don't think they're performing as well. So everything that's happening in Vermont, I would say, is, somewhat a piece of that, that larger national picture. In addition to that, though, I would say that Vermont is actually one of the most difficult markets in the country to write liquor liability insurance in. I'm going to go a little bit out of order of what my plan was here, but there was a statement before about dram shop laws and how that compares in Vermont to other states. Well, there actually is a pretty significant difference. The insurance bureau that we and most insurance companies use, ISO, they do not provide advisory rates or loss costs for the liquor liability line. It's too small of a line of business for them to do that. But what they do is they rate all 50 states, from 0 to 10 based on the liquor liability laws in place. A 0 rating, which would be the best, the lowest cost rating, means there's no way to pass liability to the entity or the bar or restaurant that serves the liquor. So liability for alcohol-related incidents lies entirely with the intoxicated individual. And there's 6 states in the country that have 0 ratings. I think the most prominent that I could, mention off the top of my head would be Virginia and Maryland. So in those states, you really can't sue a bar or a restaurant on a liquor liability claim. It would rest solely with the person that was doing the drinking. At the other extreme is a rating of 10. And a rating of 10 means there is strict liability. And so the mere act of furnishing liquor to a person who later, causes, an injury or a death or property damage can be deemed, the proximate cause of those injuries. There's 2 states that have 10 ratings. One of them is Vermont, and the other is Alabama. In between, the vast majority of states have dram shop laws that impose some limitations on the liability of the serving entity. Typically, that would say that your liability is limited to serving a minor or to serving a person who is visibly intoxicated. So service of alcohol to someone who's not a minor or visibly intoxicated is typically something that you cannot sue the bar or the restaurant or the liquor store for. Some states additionally impose maximum liability limits on the liquor line. An example is Connecticut. So in Connecticut, unless you can prove recklessness is the term they use in the Connecticut law, the limit that the bar can be sued for is $250,000. The second thing that I would point out in Vermont is sort of an ease of doing business thing. A couple of years back, I think it was in March of 2021, across all the states that we do business in, we introduced a couple of endorsements to our policies. One would allow us to selectively exclude assault and battery coverage from the policy. And that was approved in 6 of our 7 states, the lone exception being Vermont. At the same time, we also filed a firearms exclusion, and that too was approved by 6 states, but not by Vermont. And so, we could argue the merits of whether or not, it's right or wrong that those endorsements should apply or not. But, typically for an insurance company, particularly in the small states like Vermont, you would want to be able to do business, largely the way you do everywhere else. To incur additional costs to carry a different product in a state that has limited potential because of its limited size makes it really hard to do business there. And like I said, in this case, all of our states, the large and the small, except for Vermont, allowed us to do those things. The third area we look at is, what the joint and several laws are with regard to liability. And, as I understand it, Vermont is pure several. So in that respect, we don't view that as being the most unfriendly. It's pure several we view as being, fairly reasonable in terms of liability. So that's what I had to offer on the matter. I'm happy to answer whatever questions there might be.
Some of the things that you brought up, I'm almost certain are getting into insurance policy that is not the purview of this committee. We have the jurisdiction over the Department of Liquor and Lottery. And so there's this kind of overlapping thing with this particular issue. So I'm trying to get this on the table, but I just want to caution my committee that we will not delve too deeply here in House Gov.Ops and military affairs with going into insurance policy. I'll leave that for our colleagues in House Congress. Senator Byron.
So I'm just throwing a theoretical at you because we're not diving too deeply into this right now. But those pieces that you spoke to about putting the max liability in place, 250K, those exclusions on the assault and battery and the firearms, let's just say those three things happened. Where would that kind of put us on your 0 to 10 scale? And I'm talking about a spitball. I'm not going to hold your feet to fire on this. I just want to get a sense of how much that would move the needle.
Well, that's a good question. There's only a couple states that have the 250 limit. I know Connecticut does. I think there's a couple of other states. So, that actually should, I would say to a company like ours, that would make a significant difference. And whether it moves the ISO number a lot, I don't know, but it would be a significant move if that were to happen. As I said, I think the other thing that's probably just as critically important is if Vermont moves sort of to the middle of the pack in terms of moving away from strict liability into a standard where the server is responsible for serving responsibly, and as long as they do that, there's not liability.
Okay, so I guess sort of my follow up, and just to break it down to the Ross point, because I know there's a bunch of folks from the industry watching us on our YouTube channel right now. So basically, what would your industry need to see to start comfortably writing in Vermont again for these coverages? That, I assume, what you just spoke to.
Well, I'm always reluctant to speak for other carriers.
We're spitballing theoretically.
No, I understand. I think that the thing that would have the most impact in terms of moving the bar would be a change to the dram shop law. If there was a change to the dram shop law that put you, more toward the middle of the pack, that would make a significant difference. And then, like I said, the second thing would be, greater ease of doing business in terms of, allowing companies to, carry the product that they carry in other states.
Gotcha. No, thank you. You've certainly given us a lot to noodle on. I smell multiple committees of jurisdiction having to take a look at this right now. So I definitely value your insight on this. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And I'll turn it back over to the chair now and the rest of the committee.
Representative Chase.
You mentioned it would move the needle financially, but where do these policies tend to land as far as public safety? Like, do the strict states have a noticeably lower incidence of incidents, or is it pretty uniform across the country and it's just, financial implications one way or the other, but not actually public safety implications?
I don't have specific information on that. So, I can only speculate. And additionally, as I said earlier, there's only 2 states that have strict liability, that being Vermont and Alabama. I would say, fortunately, the liquor liability line is not, an extremely high frequency line of business. It is a very high severity line of business. So, even if we had specific data for Vermont and Alabama, they're both relatively small states. There wouldn't really be enough information to draw, meaningful conclusions that the laws that are in place are, a significant deterrent, or they're not.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing is that we don't necessarily have more events. It's just when something happens, it's more expensive.
I think that's fair, but I really, I'm not able to confirm or deny the first point that you have more events or you don't.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to delve into this, Representative Chase, we might want to have folks talk with us about the dram shop law specifically.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Legislative Council is prepared to talk to us about that at all, but it might be willing to answer a couple of just framing questions so that folks can understand the context. Would you be willing to do that? I'm going to invite Legislative Council. If Mr. Welch, if you want to stay with us on Zoom.
Oh, sure.
One of our attorneys from the Office of Legislative Counsel, Tucker Anderson, to just explain in broad strokes for the committee who might not be familiar with dram shop law, what the difference in levels of liability that you were referencing are. If just very broadly, just provide some context for this testimony for us. So some of us probably aren't that familiar with it.
Before you get started, can you explain, what are you saying? Dram shop?
Dram shop law.
Dram shop?
So those of us who have had licenses in Vermont know that it is not just the server, but in this instance of strict liability, and Mr. Anderson, I think will talk to this. When I had the bakery, if my employee had overserved, even if they had the right training and had done everything they were supposed to do, if they had served somebody to the point of being intoxicated and that person had gotten injured, the proprietor of the establishment could be subject to significant liability.
Well, actually, it's like server, manager, owner, and building owner. Like landlords will not sign leases unless they are covered.
And somebody who walks the server could be liable.
So there's a very long chain of liability that exists within this structure.
But again, so it's, what's the first word?
DRAM, D-R-A-M. So this is why I've invited a Tucker.
And to council, yes.
Representative Hooper, do you want to
clarify further that point? And Mr. Welch recommended server liability only.
It was a thought that was tossed out, yes, but just yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I'll start with the caveat that insurance is not one of my areas of expertise. Liquor is, and this is a very small component of what I've worked on over the last 6 years, starting with DRAM. So largely in this area of liability, we're dealing with forms of liability that have carried over from English common law. And in the cases that led to understanding of liability within the context of serving what used to be known as intoxicating or spirituous liquors, the term dram was used because that is an archaic term for a spirit, specifically a spirit that would give you a little pep. So if you've ever heard about drambuis and similar distilled spirits, that's where that term comes from. It persisted into early case law in this area in the United States, and in our case law around this became known as dram shop liability, the shops that actually sold these distilled spirits. For purposes of this, we can say that this is broadly a liquor liability statute. And leading up to this, I did do a little bit of legislative history research around 7 VSA Section 501, which you'll be able to pull up, and when this went into place. What we have now as our liquor liability statute was enacted in 1987. And there was significant discussion about listing out several of the components of what was termed earlier strict liability and when that's triggered under our statute. And there are 4 bases in 7 VSA Section 501 where you have this sort of strict liability for service. And that is serving to a minor, to a person apparently under the influence of alcohol. And there is a statutory standard for what appearing under the influence of alcohol is that I'll touch upon later, to a person after legal serving hours, or to a person who it would be reasonable to expect would be under the influence of alcohol as a result of the amount of alcoholic beverages served by the defendant to that person. And that is a very interesting and unique standard that is applied here. which is that you have strict liability for when it would be reasonable to assume that a person is intoxicated based on the volume of drinks that you have served to that person. So if you remember from a few years ago, Vermont updated its festival permit. And when the festival permits were being updated, there was significant discussion about what is the presumptive limit of what could be safely served during a festival. And it bore out to be about 6 US standard drinks. And one of the questions that came up was, is that automatically for these festivals rising to the level of, well, if you serve someone 6 beers at a festival, have you reached the limit where this is reasonable to expect that that person would be under the influence of alcohol by the time you're giving them that 6th drink? So those are the bases. Liability is like a broad primer of how this comes into play. As it was indicated earlier, you have varying stages for how someone could sue to get money from one of these operators, as it's been termed. Strict liability means that if you, by the terms of the statute, otherwise known as per se, if you violate that per se liability, you have to pay out. If it can be demonstrated that you violated the terms of the statute, there's no further litigation about the matter. And that's the highest level that can be put in statute. You are strictly liable if you violate the terms of the statute. If you serve to someone under 21, serve someone who's apparently under the influence of alcohol, which is defined as a state of intoxication accompanied by a perceptible act or series of actions which present signs of intoxication. Or to a person after legal serving hours, 1 minute after the statutory deadline, 2 a.m., that drink that you served at 2:01 a.m., you are strictly liable if there are damages resulting from that. And then that 4th criteria that we covered. Something that I don't know for certain, but that I did highlight during the earlier testimony is whether there is joint and several liability. Joint and several liability means that you can sue every single person jointly and individually in the chain of service that led to whatever the incident was. And in the statute, you'll notice in subsection A, 7 VSA section 501 subsection A, it states that a spouse, child, guardian, employer, or other person who is injured in person, property, or means of support by an intoxicated person or in consequence of the intoxication of any person shall have a right of action in his or her own name, jointly or severally, against any person or persons who have caused in whole or part the intoxication. So we are a joint and several state. Yeah. At least according to those terms.
Representative Chase has a question.
A clarification, the volume, like 6 beers, is that over a certain time period or does it not matter, like an afternoon versus an hour?
I can't recall off the top of my head, but I can send you the festival permit statute. There are limits as to how long the person can attend a festival, but I'm not sure whether that was put in statute or whether that's part of the permitting process from the Department of Liquor and Lottery.
Thank you.
Representative Nugent.
Do we have a sense of how many lawsuits are brought every year under this?
I do not.
Representative Chase.
Second, like the consumer of the alcohol is also still liable, right?
They can be. I can't give you a definitive legal answer on all the different contexts that would play out, but yes, the person, if I were to be intoxicated under the statute and harm another person's person or property, I would be part of the chain that the injured person could sue in order to get damages.
So it's not like this removes liability from people.
Right. It just extends that responsibility through me to the people that served me the alcohol.
Thank you.
Representative Hooper.
And Tucker, as to that hypothetical, despite the fact that under the influence, the person under the influence is at fault, you could also sue. Is that correct? you could also sue up the chain.
The people who served you.
Yeah.
In order to insulate myself from damages. I believe that that's the case, but I would have to check in with some of my colleagues. I did well in torts class in law school, but I haven't worked in this area in a little while.
It's been a minute. Yeah.
It's been a while since 1L year, but I can look into that for you.
Yeah, please.
And I guess the question I've got is, regardless of maybe how much alcohol you sell, this applies to anybody that has a liquor license, correct?
Correct. Yes, the liability carries with the privilege to serve.
Representative Nugent.
If this was changed, or if it's like, if Vermont went in the direction more similar to other states, does that mean, I assume there's like a variety of liability, but it wouldn't remove the liability from the server completely. It's just more of a degree thing.
Yes, and you might use the term default liability. It would change who's liable by default or by statute, but perhaps not by their acts if you can prove certain tortious standards in court. Tortious going back to torts. Don't ask me about negligent service or reckless service, but.
All right, so there's a lot to think about. Tucker, you have proven your great value once again by without a whole lot of time, giving us a ton of great information. I'm constantly amazed by our Office of Legislative Counsel and Tucker in particular for being able to do that kind of thing. So I think Representative Byron, your goal here today was get some of these issues out on the table. I think we're realizing that the businesses that have been impacted by this particular increase in insurance costs and the lack of availability of the of being able to get access to liability insurance for those specific higher risk licensees, that it's opens up the whole can of worms of liability law that we haven't really touched since 1987. So that's a lot for us to think about here. There's overlapping jurisdiction with commerce and judiciary, but I think what would be really helpful, and maybe this is a question that Mr. Welch could help us with, is do we have a sense of, you know, how many potential businesses in Vermont just can't get access to this insurance if they tried to open up a new line today that are late night venues or higher risk venues?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not a piece of information that I would have. You know, as an insurer, you know, we only see what gets submitted to us. But what I would say is that, you know, if you talk to, you know, brokers in the state that specialize in that, I know New England Excess Exchange is our biggest broker in Vermont. And they do, you know, quite a bit of liquor liability business. They could probably give you a much better read on, you know, just how difficult the market is right now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it would be helpful for us to understand, you know, what the scope and urgency of the problem is that we might potentially want to solve. I know we have at least one business, but have you...
Anecdotally, I was on a Zoom yesterday with impacted and potentially impacted operators, and there were 3 people on the call that were not operating as a result.
Not operating at all?
Not operating as a result. We have a bar that was being sold and is not operating because they're in that in-between period. And there was 2 other folks who went to their renewal cycle. It is happening right now.
How often are businesses that hold this type of insurance renewing? Is it annually?
Yes, policies typically renew annually, correct.
So the new cycle of renewals are starting to occur beginning of the year. And this is sort of when I raised the flag on this, that's why I was hitting the urgency button.
Okay. Any last questions for Mr. Welch? before we break on this for today? Well, thank you, Mr. Welch, for being with us. Representative Byron may be in contact to follow up and see if there's a little bit more information we could get about the market from one of your colleagues. And I appreciate you being with us and taking our questions today.
My pleasure. Anytime I can help, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much.
All right, enjoy the day.
Great. So that was all that we had on the agenda today. I have a meeting this afternoon, and that's why I didn't specifically schedule anything in the second half of our afternoon block. But I imagine Representative Byron, you'll work with our colleagues to figure out if there's a next step to take on this. And
yep.
All right.
Now that I have more information, both Representative Nicole and I were making eye contact, finding it agreeable that this is more than likely going to land in his jurisdiction. So he and I are going to sit down and start like hashing out a path-ish.
More power to you if you want to drive it by here for our curiosity when you come up with some ideas for how to move things along. Happy to give some time. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow we are going to hear from some retired state employees who asked for a little bit of time to testify, and then do a deep dive for most of the morning on our Agency of Digital Services. So we'll hear from the agency with their FY24 proposals. And then in the afternoon, we're going to be doing a joint session with Senate Gov.Ops. So, and that'll be with the Office of Racial Equity. And there's some of the language access report stuff that Director Davis touched on when she was here. We'll be doing a deeper dive into that. And then we'll Thursday be doing Office of Professional Regulations. So we're really doing a lot of our jurisdictional stuff this week.
Scuba gear.
Yep. Yep. I appreciate that, Representative Hooper. And then we'll get back into H127 on Thursday afternoon. And I wanted to let the committee know that Representative Byron and I had taken a lot of the pieces that we heard from the Department of Mental Health, questions that you all had, and had a meeting with Tucker. And I think he'll be capturing over the next couple of days some language that might help move that bill along and address some of the questions and concerns that we had brought up in discussion here. So we should probably be seeing that by the end of the week as well, and hopefully be able to kind of get that bill moving. We'll park it for a couple of days next week, and then maybe try to shoot for getting it more into a version that could get over our colleagues in Ways and Means, unless we have any surprises here. But just wanted to flag my intentions for scheduling, and if folks have questions or concerns about the agenda, always welcoming feedback as a new chair. We're only a few weeks in here, and I'm feeling like there's a lot of balls that we're asked to juggle here in Gov.Ops and military failures, and that's pretty normal for this committee, but just want to make sure we're not losing anybody or missing anything along the way. Well, I'll sign off, and I'll invite everybody to do